This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Recorded on Monday, December 23rd, 2013, in St. Louis, Missouri. This Agile Life, episode 30. People work here. Welcome to This Agile Life, a podcast about what it's like to be agile in the real world. Hello, everyone. I'm the host of This Agile Life, John Sextro, and joining me today are my two co-hosts, Lee McCauley.
Hey, John. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you as well, Lee. We're recording this on the Monday before Christmas in the U.S., so very appropriate that you give me the old happy holidays there. Our other co-host tonight is our old friend and pal, Jason Tice.
Good evening, John and Lee. And as a wise person once said, it all depends on the context. And so if someone happens to subscribe to This Agile Life a year from now, realize that this is the holiday season in the year 2013.
Well said.
So my gift to everyone this holiday is the gift of context and how important it can be to ensure that what you're doing is relevant.
I like context too. That's why I always say the day and the date of when we record.
In post-production.
In post. But it comes out. It comes out, it comes out okay, loud and clear on the old podcast there. All right, guys, let's jump into the discussion. And today we are going to be talking about predictions for 2014, since it is almost the end of the calendar year here in 2013. We've got some predictions for 2014, and especially related to the human side of Agile. Our old buddy Jason Tice, the Agile Factor, he dug up these 10 predictions from a guy named Gil Broza. Is that right, Jason? Is that how you say his name?
I believe it's Braza. So okay. We'll have to tweet Gil after we post this, and he can correct us on his name. But what he did, and I thought this was interesting, but it's also it's a good discussion. He took some of the things that we talk about, really some of the cultural aspects of practicing and employing Agile. And he talked about how one of his things is he's concerned they may not change in the next year. And, one thing that he wants to do is help change that. And so what we kind of thought we'd do, here's a top 10 list. We thought we'd go through it and kind of, provide our personal views on, what these, I'll even call them problems, and maybe what we think our ideas are about how we could change them in our own activities.
All right, let's go through these one by one, and we'll hopefully get through all 10 of them, and then we'll have some discussion around the prediction and how we feel about it, our personal feelings and professional feelings on the prediction itself. The first one says, people will still refer to other people as resources, even their own teammates.
So I thought this one was interesting in that it's a prediction for Agile, and I think this is more a prediction for business than necessarily the human side of Agile. But I think, I don't know, I think this keeps going through. I keep hearing it occasionally, even in our office, where we have a strong, we recognize this a lot. Whenever somebody says it, you'll hear a groan someplace in the room. So I don't know. Why does this still happen, guys?
Well, I think there are a lot of folks from the business mindset that are quick to, as long as there's got a human resource department in a company, it kind of creates a perception that, people are resources. But my simple guidance to everyone out there is just stop. If anything, you'll find you can have better discussions if you start calling people, because there are other things that you work with on a day-to-day basis that are true resources. And so you should use the word resource for those things, be it, computers or maybe time or funding or a budget. Those are resources. Let people be people. Simple.
but this is specifically around Agile. I think the complaint that I hear the most when I have developers or QA or whoever the grunt worker is that's being called a resource or is mentioning this, their problem is that it's very much a knowledge industry, and each person is very much an individual, and very much when you tailor a team, and in a lot of cases you tailor the team to the particular talents of the people that are going to be on that team. You can't just throw a bunch of resources at it, a bunch of people at it, and just think that a job's going to get done well and at the same price and at the same speed that you can throw any people at it, and that's what the predictions are still going to be the same as far as your estimates for your time, right? This is the thing that I hear a lot of is when salespeople or when business people are wanting our estimates and wanting to know how fast something is going to get done, and then they change the team. Now, wait a second; those estimates are now wrong because the team's changed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's to lead to what you're saying, because we haven't talked about complexity recently on the podcast, but what we are doing is knowledge work. It is complicated. Teams are self-managing, and the other one that I don't think is on the top 10 list here, but there's a false presumption that you can keep a team, effectively have it be the same team, but change the people. And, I'm sorry, and I know it's one thing that is in the human side of Agile, it's mentioned, is that even if you change one person on the team, hate to say it, you change the team. So that's okay, but it's important for that team to then evolve and establish an updated identity reflecting that one or two people that may have cycled in or cycled out.
I think you both bring up some good points there, and anytime, so it definitely is not specific only to Agile. So that's a good point. And then the point that Jason made is that if there's a whole damn piece of the organization called human resources, that's already lending itself to the fact that people are going to use that word. And I think Jason, there's a psychology behind the term human resources right? Because
it came out of the industrial era. I mean, that's if you've read Drive by Daniel Pink, where he talks about, motivation 1.0, motivation 2.0, and now the new thing is motivation 3.0. But in the motivation 2.0 stage, there was this idea of trying to apply, some of the traditional things from manufacturing, those same mindsets that really allowed to achieve better economic benefits from economies of scale. Let's use that to manage people. That's a really bad idea. So
I have a prediction. I think that in 2014 or 2015, there's going to be a motivation 4.0. What do you
really
think?
Well, we still have to finish architecture 3.0 because that one's not done yet. Although there's parts of it, because there's management 3.0, there's motivation. So yeah, so Lee's already moving on to the next version.
Yeah,
so
Lee's into 2015 predictions. But I think there's another piece to this that's the psychology of it, and it's a lot easier to fire a human resource than it is to fire a person. And I think it's a lot easier. My biggest pet peeve with this is not even human resource or resources. It's when people use the term FTE, which is short for full-time equivalent. And they're like, yeah, that team, they've got 7.5 FTEs, and we're going to have to cut back 1.5 FTEs.
Yeah, then you have to normalize your velocity, right, John, to do your PSI planning meetings.
No, it has nothing to do with velocity. It has to do with callously using these terms to make decisions that are going to affect people's pocketbooks and their lives.
So here's my question. So if we, obviously the list here, use the word resources, which, my simple request for everyone, go back to your work area, get a big piece of butcher paper, get the whiteboard, write the word resources on it and put a big X on it, and leave it up there, remind everyone, make a big deal out of it. That will hopefully maybe encourage people. But John, other than FTE, what are some other no-no terms? So resources is bad, FTE is bad. What else should go on the banned word list for 2014?
Apparently, according to the government, we're not allowed to say slave anymore.
Okay, well, Okay, Abraham Lincoln. That was a while back. Okay.
No, because in the U.S. it's the slave connotation is to the black people, and that's really not true, right? I mean, all throughout history there have been tons of slaves that have been all kinds of colors.
Okay.
But for some reason, there's a sensitivity now to the term slave, and you can't say slave, Jason.
Okay. Anything else? I haven't heard that recently, at least in the context of people, which I'm thankful for. I'll share. So I've heard it in the terms of build boxes, master and slave, but luckily not in the people context.
Yeah, you can't say slave. That's what I'm talking about. No more. You can't say that anymore.
All right.
So you have to say like
master, primary and secondary.
Parent and child.
So make a big sign that says no resources.
I think there's a problem with butcher paper. I think that might be politically incorrect somehow.
Yeah, it has to be like person that cuts up meat paper.
Yes.
I got a better one.
Human resource that cuts up meat.
In a few days, when your kids rip open all those presents, or whoever opens all those presents, save the wrapping paper and use it to recycle right on the back.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to number 2 before we run out of time on number 1.
I told you we're gonna do 3. That's gonna be it.
Hopefully not.
All right, number 2 is gonna be 20 minutes. Here we go. Hit it, John.
Why don't you read this one, Jason?
Okay,
we'll
number
take
2.
turns.
Nominally, Agile organizations will continue to administer performance appraisals that emphasize the individual and downplay the team. Yeah,
this is a good one, I think. I'm surprised that this one is number 2. I'm not sure if these are in like some sort of order, but I definitely have a personal problem with this. I think that incentivizing individuals is in direct conflict with the whole team approach. What do you guys think?
No, I agree totally, John.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because we just went through our yearly performance reviews, and it was an interesting exercise, and there were many discussions about exactly what is the purpose of the performance appraisals in this case, or the performance reviews. If they're really trying to get people to be better at their jobs and to get critical feedback, which I do believe is the real point, then it probably should happen way more than just once a year. And so this connection of this performance appraisal to to your benefits, or to your salary that's going to come up in half a month or a month or so when we get those things. I'm not sure there is really a connection there, but there is the implied connection.
Well, there's an implied connection. So I think the problem with this number 2 is that the whole thing needs to be reworded to say, what is the objective? If the objective is truly to help people improve, then if you can give feedback with a shorter feedback loop, you'll be able to facilitate better improvement. I mean, that's why teams have retrospectives, ideally after every sprint or every development cycle. You should apply the same to people. If you want to talk about whole team approach, this idea of going off and sitting, in a room one-on-one with someone and getting feedback, that kind of, how does that promote an awareness of what's going on? Some would say it would be better to have a team discussion, or, kind of like an open, what they typically call a 360 evaluation, which is where everyone's involved and you get feedback from your peers.
But that's still a focus on the individual.
It is, but at the same time, what do you do, John, if you've got someone on a team who maybe because of something they either understand or they don't understand, they're doing something that could be improved that's ultimately holding the team back?
I think what you do is, again, this goes back to it's the problem that our old friends in the human resource department are still stuck in the 1970s world of managing their human resources on these teams, and they're using the old management 1.0 playbook to manage things, when what they really need to be doing is saying this team succeeds and this team fails as a single unit, and everyone on that team gets, this is all in place to somehow figure out how much people are going to get in their increase and what they deserved get paid and these sorts of things. So I think that what they should do is make that team based, and either the team all gets the same increase, the same merit bonus, the same whatever, or they don't based on what their performance was. Not as individuals, as one team.
Or the other one that I've seen done in a very few number of organizations is where if there's a bonus and they can do it, they give it to the team, let the team decide how they want to handle it out. They think someone truly did contribute more, maybe they give them more.
Right.
If they want to split it equally, they split it equally.
And for the people that are out there shouting at us right now saying, well, what about Joe's on the team but doesn't do anything? Well, that's your fault if you're letting Joe get away with that. So don't let Joe get away with that. You need to bring him along or, figure it out and fix that through retrospectives, through crucial conversations with that person, and through involving key people in your team and in your organization to make that better.
So, John, since and obviously Lee and I we're with an IT company, and you're an independent. If you were truly going to give advice and consulting on this topic to someone who's doing a transformation and they say, well, what do we do with our performance appraisals? What would you tell them to do?
I'd say make it so that you do performance appraisals for the team, not for the individual. And that performance appraisal for the team applies to every individual that's on that team. And of course, you have to figure out and work things out so that if Bob was only on the team for 6 months and he was on another team for 6 months, you got to work all that stuff out. But that's what we have the old human resources department for, to figure all that stuff out.
It's the people department. Come on.
Okay, I agree. That's what I would call it if it was my business. I'd call it.
You don't like
people
talent
department.
management? I've seen that's getting popular.
Oh, I like that a lot. Talent management.
I'm looking for the catalyst. So, because every organization out there has performance appraisals. We hear all the, you hear the best case stories about, organizations that shift away. What's the first incremental step you can take to make that change?
What's your idea? Sounds like you have one.
I know, and I'm asking. I mean,
like I said, stop incentivizing individuals and start incentivizing the team or evaluating the team.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a step to that. I think that's just a clear break.
Yeah. You know what? It's less work for the people department, and it's less work for the people managers.
I know the idea that I've kicked around a few folks that has some merit, and actually I know some. We did this at a not-for-profit job that I have on the side, teaching yoga. Is we did self-reflections that we wrote up and we put them on a wall publicly. And then people just looked at them, and it was a way to get feedback. And then you had to write your name on it, so you couldn't lie, because if I write lies up there about myself, everyone will know. But it was a way to get a lot of good feedback about, here's how I think I did, and make that transparent to others. I mean, there's just a way to at least cut down on the paperwork.
Okay, I say we move on to number 3 at this point.
I think we murdered that one too.
Lee, let's give you the right of reading.
Okay, so number 3 is technology managers and stakeholders will still assume that their teams ought to develop quality products faster than is realistically possible.
I like this one a lot.
So how are we going to change that, John?
Oh, man.
I'm thinking electroshock treatment.
I'm with Lee on that one. I think if we had the magic bullet for this one, that it would be the multi-billion-dollar sales in a bottle device. I think this is the toughest nut of all of these things to crack.
I think you can crack this. So this kind of goes back to our product owner discussion a few episodes back. Both parties involved, the technology managers, the stakeholders, and as well as the teams building the products. Everybody needs to invest in building relationships, really to help people to better help manage expectations.
Okay. I think the problem here, though, is a little bit of the disconnected nature of managers and some of the stakeholders. And your comment about the product owner is valid. And I assume that you're including the product owner in with the group of people that have the unrealistic expectations, right?
Yeah. Well, from the lean mindset, there's the whole idea of not troubling your customers, which is one of the key elements of showing respect for people, which is one of the core tenets of lean. And so I think this is an example where all parties involved, the developers, the business, everyone needs to show respect for each other and really manage expectations. So where I've seen this go wrong is a lot of times you'll have a project where they might have, the business may really want to have specific, line item deliverables or feature sets, and they don't understand that over time things change, things evolve, both in the technical context and also in the business context. And I think what needs to happen is there needs to be more communication and more feedback there to really manage expectations.
I think this really goes deeper than that to some degree. I think this also goes to how we estimate projects, because we on the technical side do a pretty lousy job of estimating projects, because when we're asked to estimate them and when the business people really need them to decide whether they should pursue a particular project or not is way at the beginning, and we don't have enough information to really get an accurate estimation. If it were instead required, if we could find some better way to do those estimates, perhaps doing something like what Jason, you've proposed before, and I think John, you've mentioned this too, with the probabilistic estimations and getting some standardized rate for a company. So, for example, if the company we worked for, if all of the projects standardized on one particular thing, one particular way of measuring cycle time, for example, then we could come up with a probabilistic estimate. Okay, well, it looks like we could break this particular project down into into this many features, and typically features, we can just do a rough estimate of how many stories are going to be involved in a given feature, and based on that rough estimate, we're still probably, if we use the probabilistic estimations, we could give a pretty good idea of how long that stuff is going to take. And then it's just a matter of the business people trusting those numbers.
Yeah. The other one, Lee, that's implied in there is you made a bunch of non-stated assumptions about certain levels of standardization. So there's probably some standardization with the tech that's being used, the process being used, all the stuff involved, and to make sure we don't contradict ourselves from earlier in our discussion. The biggest thing that causes variation in cycle time are the people involved. So that's hard to do. Could work.
I think if you had enough data over the course of a year or two for a given organization, and you could compartmentalize those or categorize those based on project types, be it iOS or web services or that sort of thing. If you can categorize the type of project it is, then I think you could get a pretty good estimation system there that wouldn't require people breaking it down into infinite detail at the very beginning.
Yeah. Here's what I think is going on. I think what you're saying, Lee, is 2 steps of improvement away from what is actually happening and what Gil is talking about in this third item here. What he's saying is that people, the managers and stakeholders aren't even bothering to go to the point at which they have some sort of an assessment or an estimation from the team. They're just jumping to the conclusion that sounds like about 6 months worth of work, and I'm not even going to ask anybody. I'm just going to assume that it is going to take 6 months.
Yeah, it's like when you're on a project, the next thing you know, your stories get estimated and the team never looked at them.
Exactly. So merely allowing the team to do some of that work and estimation and provide the feedback and their guess about how long it's going to take would be a step in the right direction. What is happening here is that, and here's what I think about this a little bit. I think the further away from the technology on a day-to-day basis that you are, the more you start to do this, because you have this look back on your career and history, and you're like, oh, things were easy when I was doing them, and so everything took 2 hours to do. And so when you start to think through these things in your mind as a manager or a stakeholder, you're like, yeah, that giant system is probably about 6 months worth of work. And you just jump to these conclusions. So I don't know. I think it's part of the part of the optimistic side of the human psyche.
Well, it's also part of the fact that humans generally remember things the way they want to remember them, not the way they actually are. I think we've mentioned this before, that the worst piece of evidence that you can get in the court of law, almost the worst, is a witness, because witnesses suck as far as remembering what actually happened.
Oh yeah. Jason wants to say something.
Yeah, I found my video preview on it. So I have two different thoughts. First and foremost, there's the need to change the paradigm by which the technology managers and stakeholders think about how they manage scope and expectation of a project. So not to go Skilled Agile on you, but one thing the Skilled Agile framework does well is it talks about an idea of what I'm going to call an effective roadmap. And that is that, you've got really good fidelity for what you're doing, like in your next build cycle that they call a PSI. And so you've got it's well defined, it's estimated, it's scoped out. Then the next one, which is typically, the next build cycle, each of these are about, they say 3 to 4 sprints. So call it 6 to 8 weeks. If you're doing 2-week sprints, you've got enough understanding of the marquee features, which is kind of like the high level, what's coming down the road. And then beyond that, you've just got, real high level statements. So the challenge here is, saying that as things come closer, they come into greater fidelity. And from that, you can better manage expectations. The second piece to bring out is, I completely lost my train of thought in the second piece. I shouldn't try to make 2 points at once, so we'll just go on.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Number 4 is that companies will continue to not train their developers in Agile engineering because technical execution skill will remain off the radar. I guess they're just saying that the companies are not going to spend any money on test-driven development or other things related to Agile engineering practices, pair programming, continuous delivery, short iterations, right?
I'm not sure how to respond on this one. It seems obviously true, but I have no clue how you would go about trying to change the minds of C-level executives to try to get them to focus on this kind of training and to feel the importance of it.
They could hire the Tice McCulley Sextro consulting firm, and we could go in there and help them out.
Well, okay, but to call like it is, guys, I mean, some of this is a little bit of, there's more to effective Agile software development than the process. I mean, yes, the process plays a component, and in some instances, the process is neglected. So you could have the greatest engineering disciplines in the world, and if you think the process will fall in line, that's actually a fallacy. But I think what's more out there now, and this is a remnant of people who have become interested in the space, and that's good for business, is to realize that once you learn the process, and maybe you go to Scrum class, and you get a Scrum cert, that there are technical practices that need to be in place to ensure that methodology can be successful.
Right. And that's true, Jason. And I think the point here is that that's where the people are stopping in management is at the point where they have the process. They're saying, we've identified a process. We've gotten some training on a process. That's enough. Don't worry about giving the developers and engineers additional training to help them become more effective in the engineering practices. And that's the myth.
Yeah. And actually, the thing that's out there, and I was going to plug this, but I don't know how to plug it yet, like as a pick at the end of the show. So there's a new thing out there. It's called The New Deal, the-new-deal.org. And it's kind of a pushback against a lot of the folks who, it's really about getting things to be more focused on true development techniques and not so much about process. There's an opportunity to go online to sign it. And I think over time, we'll see what this grows into being. So it's got a lot of signatories right now. So, and it's not real well defined what you're signing up for, but we'll watch the space.
One thing that we can offer maybe to some of the engineers and developers out there is that if your team has a training budget, or if you get as an individual some amount of training budget, maybe you can talk to your manager, to your people leader in your area, and ask if you can maybe pool that all together to have some sort of a larger training to help with some particular engineering practice that you have observed that your team could benefit from training on or around?
One thing we should try to do in the next year, John, is we should try to, because there's some really good like TDD, videos and stuff. They're kind of like you follow along. But we should probably, maybe do a greatest hits thing where all of us come in with a couple different, I'll call it self-help resources that we could make, promote awareness of for the betterment of everyone out there, and really make that focused on engineering practices, not so much on the process.
Good point. Okay, let's move on to number 5. Jason, you're up.
Okay, so project managers will still struggle to come up with a good measure of agile team productivity for their executives, and consultants will continue telling those project managers that they shouldn't be measuring productivity. Well, then what do the project managers do? Help me, John.
Is that true, Jason? Do the consultants tell the project managers that they should not be measuring productivity? Is that what the consultants are doing out there?
That's what some consultants do, but if you're asking the question personally, I do not do that. That's like saying that the Scrum Master's job is to make sure that everyone else is doing their jobs, which it's not.
It seems like it's one of these dirty little secrets, maybe, that people often try to shy away from the bright spotlight of measuring productivity.
I think the problem is defining what productivity you're measuring. It's because there's a lot of easy things that have kind of been lumped into the term measuring productivity, like lines of code and test coverage and that sort of thing, that we all know just doesn't work and isn't really useful except under the right circumstances and used by the right people who know what the context is. It shouldn't be used by managers and above. And so when you talk about measuring productivity, it's like, okay, well, what productivity are you measuring there? How do you decide what is a productive team or not?
Well, I think this number 5 is just a train wreck the way it's stated right there. So let's fix it. Okay, I'm going to fix it. So first and foremost, obviously we got a problem. The project managers are talking to the executives. So if I'm the consultant in there, I'm going to work with the project managers to say, hey, let's either go talk to the executives together, or let me talk to the executives, or let me help coach you on how to talk to the executives on what you should be telling them because you're practicing Agile. Then we're going to go and see those executives, and we're going to take this thing called the feature list, okay? And we're going to show it to the executives, and we're going to say, executives, we want to get some input from you on what the estimated, in your own opinion, what is the business value of these features, item for item. This information will be very useful if you haven't started a project yet. You can actually use this to help facilitate planning. You could do your latest, shortest job first, prioritization if you want to do that. But most importantly, to measure productivity, let's then measure the cycle time or the flow by which those features are made available for release. And then over time, if you have business value associated with those features, you can go to the executive and say, look, in the last month, we released these features to production. In a perfect world, you'd have revenue targets on these, especially if you're in a software as a service model. So if you release a new feature to production, you can charge for it, you're going to sell additional subscriptions. You can make a strong case that you can coach executives with if you can associate business value with features and show that to them.
And what's the number one way that we demonstrate progress and by association productivity on an Agile project?
By releasing working software.
Yes.
And by delivering working software.
And further by demoing that software to our stakeholders. So there has to be some way, I think, in there that you can correlate the progress of working software to productivity. How often are they getting working software? To your point, Jason, what is the worth or the business value of what is being delivered? And is the team focused on delivering the most important functionality for the business at each and every opportunity throughout the release plan?
Yeah, I'm trying to make some like simple takeaways from this whole rundown. I mean, number one obviously was my, put the big resources, the no resources sign up, for that. But this one, I mean, if there's a simple thing, if any team or project there is looking for an experiment for the new year, try to get some business value estimates in some type of a quantitative measure, be it, I don't know, revenue or whatever, maybe even use points of some kind. Put those on stories, measure that throughout the course of your project. See if it helps you out when you have to work with stakeholders. My hypothesis is it will, but I'd love feedback on if you try it and it blows up in your face.
I think it would be an interesting experiment if you are equating productivity to exactly what you're talking about, Jason, which is business value. It would be interesting to see what the business people, the exercise they go through to actually put business value onto these things. I've seen it happen a couple of times, and it always feels like they go into it earnestly for about the first half, and then they get really tired of it and just kind of start throwing numbers onto things.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is that still we're thinking of old management 1.0 versus knowledge worker productivity, which they talk a lot about in the book Management 2.0. Who is that book from?
No, Management 3.0, John. You're a version off. Everything's at 3.0 now.
I'm still working on Wife 2.0. So.
Oh, geez.
No, but I think there's the Radical Management by. Oh shoot, I can't remember his name.
Hey, Jürgen Appello.
What?
Jürgen Appello. If you're talking Management 3.0.
No, I'm talking about radical management.
Radical management. Wow, we're all having a break. We all had too much eggnog tonight. Was tonight the night of this Agile Knife holiday party?
No, we need to have one of those. Anyway, back to the topic. So there's the idea of the old way you measure productivity just for workers, right? The number of reports that somebody produces, or the number of tires that roll off of the tire assembly line. Yeah. With knowledge workers, you can't do that because a lot of what they're doing is all inside their brain and is not easily manifest in a way that can be demonstrated as productivity. So we've got to come up with new and different ways to deal with this. And I think that's the challenge.
So simple takeaway is put some business value on your stories for next year. And I think if you're a team or a coach of a team and you go to your product owner, your business stakeholders, and you have that discussion, as you mentioned, John, I think that will hopefully help get people interested more in what you're doing.
Very good point. And you mentioned discussion, Jason, and I'd like to point out at this point that it's often difficult for us to carry this discussion on with you outside of the strict confines of the podcast. Obviously, there's just a lot of one-way communication going on here. So we'd like to invite you to continue this discussion with us on our private Google Plus community. You'll be able to interact with the host of the show, help us decide on future topics for the show, and engage in all of our lighthearted tomfoolery, mostly focused at Jason Tice.
Really? That's so nice. Is that a personal invitation, John, or is that an invitation to the community at large?
That is a invitation to the community at large. So you can join our community from our website by clicking the Join the Community banner out there. So check it out, guys. Okay, let's go on to number 6. Sorry. And
bad meetings.
I think Lee's up.
Yeah. Bad meetings and complaining about the number of meetings in Agile will remain the norm.
Man, I hate bad meetings. And I don't have them. I hope I don't have them. I always have agendas, short, half hour, at the most, if possible. No more than 45 minutes. I hate hour-long meetings. I hate complaining about meetings. And I just think meetings are the dregs of our daily life and industry.
So for the purpose of discussion, can we clarify on what a meeting is? I mean, obviously, if it's a sit-down meeting in a room, that's a meeting. But what about a stand-up? What about a turnaround? I mean, are these things all what we're going to call meetings too?
Yeah, I think it's got to be some sort of scheduled out in advance thing. And they're mostly ways for managers to look like they're actually doing work, I think.
Boy, John is ripping on the managers today. So this to me goes up with number 1. ask yourself, if you're a project manager or even a coach, you feel you need to have a meeting, knowing if you've already done number 5, which is all this business value stuff, and you've got your stakeholders, they're frothing. They want you to finish more stories and more features to get more business value out there. You need to do your part to try to reduce the number of meetings. You need to have meetings. So if you're the scrum master, or you're a coach, or you're, someone who's responsible, kind of like John said, you need to do your homework. If you're a facilitator for a retro, do you have a plan for that retro so you're going to come in and it's going to be successful? Or if you're just going to come in and wing it, will that be effective and will that be well received? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And I know Amos isn't here, but a little bit of planning can go a long way. So I'm not saying go off and have a huge plan, but ensure that you have enough information that the discussion is successful.
I think the problem is that a lot of people will use meetings as a crutch because they.
For what? Example
would be, you just said you were just just a little bit of planning. Well, okay, we didn't have enough planning. In a retrospective, this comes out. We didn't really understand the stories well enough, and it took us longer to get into them. We had to pull some back, blah, whatever. But then the tech lead or the PM or whoever will say, oh, well, maybe we should just have these short little planning meetings every week to talk about that. And maybe that really is necessary. The problem, though, is rather than trying to think about, is this necessary? Is this the most effective way to get this communication to happen? People will simply jump to, let's have a meeting. That's what I mean by it being a crutch.
That's like having a meeting to have a meeting.
Oh, God, yeah. That's the worst of all meetings, too.
Yeah.
I think they do a lot of those in big government. We're going to meet to get ready for the meeting with the big Mr. So-and-so.
Oh, yeah. Did you have to have a dry run?
I think there's two parts of a problem, so maybe I'll get lost like Jason did before. But the first part of the problem is somebody who schedules a meeting doesn't bother to take a few minutes to think about what it is they want to accomplish in the meeting. And then they're going to take the time of, 5, 6, 10 people for an hour and burn a bunch of their resources, burn a bunch of their time resource, not the people, their time resource.
Yeah, I thought we were going back to the Salem witch trials here. You were burning people.
I'm trying not to burn any people. Not too often anyway. And then all because that person scheduling and arranging the meeting couldn't take a few more minutes to thoughtfully consider what are we going to discuss and what are going to be our outcomes. And then our second piece, and the whole time Tice has been trying to distract me from actually remembering the second piece of that, is, and I forgot it. Oh, no.
Yeah.
No. So
happy holidays. I remembered my other one, by the way, if you want to go back to it.
No, I have it. And so the second half of it is that when somebody does thoughtfully put together an agenda or send out items ahead of time, then the other people attending the meeting are not ready and prepared. And therefore, you spend the first half of the meeting reviewing all of this information with everyone. And it takes a half an hour just to do that, and then a half an hour to make the decision on the thing you wanted the decision made on. So
it's funny. My wife is a teacher, and she has the same complaints about her students never doing their homework and being ready to actually learn in class.
Exactly the same thing.
Yep. Doesn't get any better once you're out of college.
Why should it? They've learned the lesson well in school.
Yep.
So I got a few things to say. So first and foremost, since we're all about trying to, who gets the last word here, back on number 3, which is the infamous discussion where I lost my thought, I did want to mention something about investment themes. Maybe we'll go back to that and how they could be used to help manage expectations and make things easier over time.
There's no going back, and nobody remembers what number 3 is by now.
Number 3 was about the managers and the stakeholders wanting things as fast as possible. So anyways, because the one thing we didn't talk about was how you ensure you don't have tech debt, which slows you down over time. But John doesn't want to talk about that. So let's talk about bad meetings. So, John, you brought up, sometimes in the public sector, there's a desire to have a lot of meetings because there might be people they're paid meeting coordinators.
Yeah.
Having worked in the public sector, in particular in the defense space, one thing that I liked, this speaks to what you were talking about, is that some meetings, based upon protocol and who you're meeting with, have a role that's called the action officer, the AO.
Oh, no.
Well, no, this is the person that's responsible for ensuring the meeting's successful. And they have to, do an agenda, which doesn't mean they talk the whole time. It means they're responsible for having the right people in the room for the topic that's going to be discussed. And they help facilitate the meeting. They might keep time. They might be responsible for, taking notes for people who can't make it, or so there's a value captured. Or they might delegate that to someone else who's there, but nonetheless, they are really responsible for the effectiveness of that meeting. I think it worked great as a way to ensure that when you bring people together, you make an investment of that time, which costs money, because time is a resource. People are not. It ensures that there's someone who ultimately is accountable for ensuring effectiveness.
When done right, I think that action officer approach can work very well. It just has to be crisply executed, and there has to be clear expectations for what is going to be accomplished. The problem I see in Agile is that we say we drink a little too much of that Agile Kool-Aid sometimes, and we say, oh, we're self-managing. We don't need to have anyone in charge. We don't need to have anyone accountable. And the problem is, if you don't have anyone accountable, or you think the whole team is accountable, well, on some teams that works, but on other teams it doesn't. And then you have no one being accountable, and we get number 6, which is too many bad meetings. Very good.
So if you're out there, don't be afraid to be accountable. It's okay. But also, just because you're accountable, it doesn't mean you're in charge, because you can delegate things.
Okay, let's do number 7. Now that the Agile Factor has given us talking points for bad meetings. I like that. That was good, too.
And he still wants to go back and talk about investment themes. Woo!
Number 7 is cubicles.
And Jason, lay off the eggnog, would you?
No, it's the Kanbantini, man. It's the best drink ever.
Okay. Number 7, cubicles and other sensory deprivation cells will still dot offices, but there will be fewer of them. So that's progress. I think he's saying there's going to be some progress, but we will still have the cubicles and the other sensory deprivation cells like offices and private rooms.
Well, so Lee and I are an organization that is pretty open. So it's hard for us to... So, John, you're in the environment that isn't very open. So, or is it?
It's actually more open than you might think. We do have a much more open floor plan. We do not have cubicles. Managers do have offices, mainly because they have to have those human resource conversations that we've so famously talked about here.
We just need to stop having those.
Yeah, but we have big Agile pod areas. Some people call them pits. Some people call them bullpens. And they're wide open.
So I think it's funny. This has gone mainstream. The thing you can thank, I think, that's helping with number 7 is, I mean, the developers that's out there, but sometimes there is the stereotype of the programmer that wants to sit in a cubicle for 15 hours a day and write code all by himself. Don't talk to him. Give him Mountain Dew and pizza or Jimmy John's, and he'll be fine. Just let him be. But what's funny is from the user experience community, some of the designers are out there. One thing that all the design agencies do is they're very good at credentializing and showing off their brick and mortar offices because that helps them sell. And so people see these design centers that are like all open and they're glass. And what's funny is people realize that works effectively for design because design is highly collaborative. Well, guess what? The same is true for software development. So if you do that for your design group, or you have a design company that does that, why not engage with a software company that employs the same practices for collaboration?
Well said. I think those are good points. Okay, let's move on to number 8. Jason?
Number 8, female programmers and architects. Ah, good. We're inclusive here. Will still be unheard of in many organizations.
Can we answer this at all without sounding sexist?
Probably not.
Okay, well, in that case, as long as we know, then go ahead.
All right, I'm writing it down here. We are going to have in 2014 predictions for this Agile Life. We need to have an all-female episode with none of us involved.
No Y chromosomes.
Have we ever had have we ever had a female guest, John?
No, but I have a couple on tap. At least
good.
two, if not three.
Good.
I actually think that I have. Yeah. So there's a lot less females in engineering, in this sort of an engineering discipline, software development and architecture going along with that. But in my history, I have had a number of women work with and for me and around me, far more than I think is what would be considered the industry average. Almost every team that I've been on has had at least one female, if not more.
Well, the other thing that I like about what Gil's calling attention to is he is not being afraid to call it like it is. And that is that sometimes, and we started talking about human resources, there's a perception out there that, sometimes you might have a female member of a team who isn't, there's a perception that can they do the work to be a technical member of the team, or are they better to be more of, kind of think of it as a project manager, a scrum master, not a hardcore tech role. I like what Gil's calling attention to here to say that, you know what? Again, it's working with the tech. Anyone can do it. There are any barriers. So everyone should play together.
Yeah, I think this goes, straight to old style prejudice here. I mean, you just have to assume that anybody coming on the team, no matter what their background is, can do the job that you're expecting them to do. And in my experience, as long as you start with that expectation, pretty much everybody that I know, regardless of what their background is, will meet those expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, the other one that I could share, and again, I feel this, you guys remember the famous episode we did talk about yoga. So as a hobby, I teach yoga. That is not let's put it simply, that's not a male-dominated field by any part. It's tough. You're at a workshop or you're in an environment, you're like, oh, I'm the only guy in the room. Okay, interesting. So, but for everyone else out there, know that you have allies. I think all three of us on this podcast, actually probably anyone who's involved with this podcast is an ally. And at the same time, the equalizer is the technical practices. And at that juncture, once you get involved, the sky's the limit.
I think maybe what Gil is pointing at and prodding at here is the fact that there are just less overall women in as a ratio in the industry. And the three of us as fathers with daughters should maybe try and improve that by encouraging our young daughters to do things like robotics that I know Lee is into and other engineering things.
What are you talking about, man? My kids think that Dean Leffingwell looks like Santa Claus. So, because they saw a picture of him. So they've learned Scaled Agile. Now we just got to get them to do some technical work.
Buy your girls Legos.
I have lots of those. You want to see my Lego house?
Excellent suggestion, Lee. Lee, why don't you go and read number 9?
Oh, goodness gracious, here it comes.
Consultants will continue arguing over the merits of various methodologies and frameworks, while practitioners, getting more and more confused, will just do whatever their organizations will tolerate.
No, we won't.
Yes, we will. No, I mean,
we won't.
So this is that New Deal thing again. This is where I think, people have, and it's funny because pick something that's not controversial in the methodology space. I mean, Scrum has its issues. I mean, Scaled Agile has its issues. People are all over that these days. And at the end of the day, people need to get work done. So I see the merit to this statement, but given the hype and the potential revenue that can be earned by selling methodologies, and I don't see the market is going to stop buying methodologies, I don't really know what the way ahead here is.
There's definitely an impedance mismatch because the consultants and the companies they work for earn money through coming up with new and innovative practices to sell to companies, while practitioners get paid for executing on their project and getting things done. And those two things are potentially in direct conflict with each other.
Well, but see, John, I think there's a compromise there. I think there's an opportunity to say, hey, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, whatever, but part of my success criteria is helping your practitioners deliver. And if that's part of my success criteria, yes, I am going to help coach them on what they need to do from a methodology perspective, but I'm not going to, cause them harm, which will impact their ability to deliver and be successful, because that's then chained to the way I'm being evaluated. That's the way I think. I know others that don't think that way. So I know there are some consultants that are a little bit more focused on their methods out there, but I'd encourage them to change.
I think this goes back to number 5, actually, in being able to measure productivity. I think that as a scientist kind of a guy, I can't really call myself a scientist, but I would like to, and so I still kind of harken back to the fact that if you can find some way to quantify what it is to be for a team to be productive and to accomplish the goals that are set in front of them in some quantifiable way, then we don't have to argue about the merits of various methodologies. We simply have to measure them.
I think that's a good point, Lee. I don't want to gloss over it, but I think that one of the things that we lose focus on maybe as consultants from, coming into a company, newly coming into a company, we forget about the fact that some of the things that we're doing and suggesting affect actual people. And maybe we should spend a little more time understanding the goals and aspirations of those people before we start blanketly providing suggestions and white papers and the like to these organizations.
I think ultimately it may come back down to revisiting the manifesto, or reminding ourselves about what that really means from an Agile perspective, because the manifesto was never meant to be a particular methodology. It was meant to say, here are some good ideas, some things that you should focus on above others, and not how to get there or a particular framework or even particular practices. It was just, here are the things that you should value.
Yeah, but Lee, the market's gotten so bloated. I mean, earlier this evening, John and I were talking, and just earlier today, I got a push, like a white paper download from a really big company in the Agile space, and it opens up saying Agile practices, blah blah blah. Completely lost the whole idea of principles and values. So, I mean, the market has become really, really, really polluted these days. Again, I'll put it as a pick at the end of the show. This New Deal thing that's out there, it's kind of a pushback against that. So, and I don't know what it is. We'll figure it out over time.
Okay, so there is a number 10, but it's kind of a throwaway. And number 10 says, and people like Gil will remain hopeful and driven to change all of this.
Well, I think by that, John, it means people like Gil and at least the 3 of us, since we kind of ripped the last 9 to shreds with a whole bunch of hopefully usable, actionable advice that, even if you only pick one of them, if you try that, if everyone does something little, overall, it will help the big picture get better.
Stay vigilant. Try and find ways to make small incremental improvements in your organization when the opportunities present themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So having gone through that, does anyone have takeaways? So like a one or, a few things that you think are capstone to the whole list?
I have a feeling the Agile Factor has a whole list.
Of course, the Agile Factor. He took notes. So
let's hear it.
So I have two. Okay. And you know what? For fun, I'm going to do a rehash of my one thing that I didn't talk about on number 5, because it's something we need to talk about. So the rehash on number 5, as I throw a pen at the computer. The rehash on number 5 says, really, when we talk about we shouldn't be measuring, no, that was the
number 3.
Number 3. Thank you. That was so long ago, Lee. Boy, I'm not thinking tonight. So,
and number 3 says that technology managers and stakeholders will still assume that their teams ought to develop quality products faster than is realistically possible.
So the problem with this is so many stakeholders, they don't understand that the complexity of knowledge work and the complexity of the engineering disciplines. If you're investing in your monitoring investments, you should be investing some in new features, but throughout a project, there will be the need to invest in call it technical work, infrastructure improvements, architecture, so you can avoid technical debt. Assume it's going to happen. And really, if you're a team, work to make that case so that over time, it doesn't become, your software doesn't become to the point where it's too complicated and costly to maintain. Over time, it should be easier to develop if you maintain your technical practices. You guys agree or not?
Agree.
I agree. I think that we should do an entire show on tech debt, I think.
Okay. I'm just saying that, and knowing that from a couple, Scaled Agile and other frameworks, they call that an investment theme, where capacity allocation. You're allocating capacity for different things. So my two takeaways. Number one, the simple thing that I think everyone should go do: put the big sign up that says no resources. Or if you don't want to put a sign up that says no resources, put a sign up that say people work here. So again, people work here. People are what makes self-managing teams unique. And all too often, we think that we can overcome people issues with technology. Sorry, you can't. You got to work through the people issues, and you got to acknowledge that you're working with other human beings. So number two, real simple, measure everything. Real simple here. So, I talked a lot about business value and measuring stuff there, but anything you're doing, and what we even said at the end about doing experiments, if you don't know how to measure, that's a great thing to learn for the next year. So I would challenge you to say you could measure anything out there. And as John would say, I guess you should go to our community, our little private Google Plus community, and you could ask us questions, and we'll see if we can, maybe if you got questions about how to measure something, we might have an idea that might be relevant for what you're trying to do. So check us out online. Try to measure everything going forward into the new year.
I don't know that I can back up measure everything, because there's just so much there. And I think that you should collect measurement metric information whenever it's convenient, and really make some tough decisions about exactly what behaviors you want to motivate and drive through measurement.
Measure everything that's relevant.
Okay. All right. Any last words on the human side of Agile?
Well, just that the human side of Agile is a great book. If you haven't read it, it's a great book. It talks at depth about a lot of the things we've got in here tonight. And again, it does acknowledge that if you're doing Agile, you're doing knowledge work in an environment that can be volatile, because it's all based upon human interaction. So check the book out if you haven't. It's a great thing. Also, Gil's got a great blog. He's also got a great email newsletter he puts out about every 6 weeks. Actually, in this list we went down, came out in one of his newsletters that he pushed out just recently. So great things to check out. I guess I'll have to put that as my pick so we can feature that in the show notes.
All right. Well, you're already into your picks, Jason. So why don't we go officially into the picks and let you do your few other ones? All
right. So I've already kind of bled all over my picks. So obviously, Human Side of Agile. It is a book by Gil. He also has the corresponding website, humansideofagile.com. Check it out. This thing about, kind of talking about, evil consultants call them, really focused on methodology. The New Deal with dashes, so the-new-deal.org. Check that out. Might be something you're interested in. And last but not least, kind of overscoring the whole theme tonight about people. This new book coming out is called Joy Inc. It's the story of Menlo Innovations, put together by Richard Sheridan, and talks a lot about human factors and really a way to create a joyous experience in the workplace from a cultural background. So a corporate culture. So by the time this podcast is posted, the book will be out. So check it out, and it's a good read. We'll probably talk about it on an upcoming episode since I like it a lot.
Hey, Jason, you know what? I don't like that they've co-opted the, who was it, Eisenhower in the New Deal, or not Eisenhower, who was it, Truman, one of the presidents?
This is not a history podcast. It doesn't matter. Okay. The only history here that matters is Agile history.
Well, I just don't like that they've co-opted that term, New Deal.
I don't even know what that thing is. So I'm sure we'll learn more about it in the coming year.
I hope somebody will tell me on Twitter. All right, Lee, what's your picks tonight?
Well, I have one that is really a movie called Pentagon Wars. And in particular, there's about a 10 or 11 minute piece of it that talks about the story behind the Bradley fighting vehicle. And it's really a lesson on scope creep. So they start with this troop carrier, and it's got a gun on top, and it's well made for what it's supposed to do. And then the generals get a hold of it and start changing the scope all over the place, and it takes another 10 or 15 years to get the thing out. And then it ends up being a troop carrier that doesn't actually transport that many troops, and a scout that is too big to be stealthy, and a semi-tank that doesn't have enough armor to protect itself. So the whole story of that is kind of a really interesting perspective from an Agile software perspective, because we see that all the time too. So you can find it on you can find that particular YouTube clip if you just look at Pentagon Wars and then Bradley fighting vehicle, you'll find it. Or you can rent or buy the whole movie, Pentagon Wars.
Somebody said to me on Twitter recently, Lee, that, and it's apropos of your description of the Bradley fighting vehicle. They said that a camel is a horse that was designed by a committee.
Interesting.
And to which I replied back, "Hey, I think a camel's got some good attributes to it."
Of course it does.
Okay.
It has emergent architecture and intentional architecture.
Yeah. All right. My pick tonight is a simple one. It's something called Magic Prefs for all of you Mac owners and Mac users out there. It's a really cool little utility that helps you customize just about every aspect of your mouse. If you have an Apple Mighty Mouse, if you have the trackpad, this Magic Prefs gives you an amazing array of settings that you can modify and change, and things that you can do to improve your mousing. I noticed and had a problem that when I was using Safari with my Magic Mouse, that I would somehow inexplicably zoom in to like a crazy percentage, like I was a blind person. And I was like, what the heck is this doing? And I couldn't figure out how. So it was part of the journey how I found Magic Prefs and started using it. And that's my pick. Jason.
Only one. You're so good. Hey, I got one bonus here. I got a bonus. I'm going to try
bonus pick. Okay.
No, I'm going to kick it to Lee. Lee, can you tell the joke? So for those that don't know, we were supposed to do this episode like a week ago, and schedule got all messed up, and Lee and I somehow hooked up through John's Skype account, and we just talked for a while. We should have recorded it, but we didn't. But Lee told me a joke that I thought was pretty good. Let's let Lee close it out tonight. He could tell us this joke.
You put me on the spot, Jason, and I was reading it off of somebody's webpage at the time, so I can't bring back the joke, man.
Okay, well, guess what? Go in your browser history and find it, and in a future episode of This Agile Life, Lee's going to tell us a really fun joke, and maybe Lee's gimmick should be a joke every episode. If you like that idea, let us know about it.
Here's the super deep tease, is that you only get to find out what the joke is if you join the private Google Plus community.
Oh, Lee great. You guys are putting real pressure on me here.
Yeah, real pressure.
Lee told the joke really good, in an audible format. So we need to put the joke on in a future episode. We'll go find it, Lee, and we'll come back. So
okay,
everyone come back next year. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, Mr. Joke Maker Jokerson. All right, guys, that's all we have time for tonight.
Good, so I can go shopping at the last responsible moment at 2 a.m.
Well, tomorrow at 2 a.m. is the last responsible moment.
Yes,
I think responsible is way past, Jason.
Oh,
really? Well, this will be an infamous holiday season, is all I can say.
Well, we better end it so Tice can go finish up all his shopping for his significant other, his better half. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me. Jason, where can folks find out more about you out on the internet?
People could find me at The Agile Factor. That's www.theagilefactor.com. Also on Twitter at The Agile Factor.
And of which you will have all kinds of talkie points and finger waving and face palming and everything else.
Yes, I will. After I get through the holidays, and as Amos would say, my backlog is so long of things to put on my blog. Oh my goodness, I got to get there. I should have spent more time working on my backlog as opposed to making my backlog.
That'll be a whole nother show too.
I think I need to hire this guy named John Sextro to be my Agile coach.
All right, good idea. Lee, where can people find you out on the internet?
I'm at Agile Atheist on Twitter and agileatheist.blogspot.com for my blog.
Very good. And I'm John Sextro. You guys can find me at johnsextro.com. Hopefully my redirect is working again. Sorry about that. You can also follow me on Twitter at jcsextro. And you can find this information, including our Twitter handles and our blog sites and everything on our slightly revamped website at thisagilelife.com. We've got a bunch of information out there about how to join the show. And someday Lee and Jason are going to get pictures of themselves out there as well after I harass them a bunch. You can find the show notes to the podcast and the links to the private community. And hey, everybody, thanks for listening and keep living this Agile life.